everybody, and welcome back to Leading Entrepreneurs of the World. I'm Stelios Katsakis, CEO of One Business World. Leading Entrepreneurs of the World features entrepreneurs, founders, and business leaders presenting on cutting-edge topics and the latest industry developments. Our goal is to provide the global business and entrepreneurial communities with a window into the minds of those who are shaping the future of the world. Today, we're very pleased to welcome leading senior professional and subject matter expert, Dimitris Horiatis. Dimitris is a senior manager for innovation and technology for the Americas with Invest Hong Kong, where he helps technology companies with market entry into APAC. Dimitris has been working in international investment promotion, covering multiple US regions, as well as the UK and Hong Kong, always focusing on technology. At Invest Hong Kong, Dimitris works with entrepreneurs, SMEs, and multinationals that wish to set up an office or expand their existing business in Hong Kong, offering advice and services to support companies from the planning stage right through to the launch and expansion of their business. When he's not working, Dimitris enjoys paddle boarding in the summer and spending time with his wife and son. Dimitris, it is a great pleasure to have you here with us today to hear more on the always important for every company topic of strategizing around and planning and international expansion, and more specifically about the milestones one needs to hit in their home country before expanding internationally. Thank you and welcome to Leading Entrepreneurs of the World. Welcome, Dimitris.
Thank you, Sergio, very much for your very kind introduction, and I do appreciate you inviting me on your great show. Obviously, I'm very honored to be considered for your One Business World webinar, and I hope that I can provide some interesting insight from the last over 10 years that I've been doing international business development for your audience, and that we'll all have a nice conversation even after this, and people will follow up, and happy to continue the relationship.
Absolutely.
Very good. So with that, I will share my screen here and go over some of the slides that I've prepared here. International expansions are an exciting thing to think about as a company, a small corporation, an SME. It really kind of adds lots of creativity to a company, and it also is able to provide additional revenue, additional talent, and so it's quite important. And depending on what region of the world you're doing business in, it could be quite important. It could actually be the reason why you succeed as a business, or if you don't succeed. And I think for many of us that live in North America and have the benefit of being in a big market, in a big mature market, we don't think about sometimes the importance of thinking internationally. And because we have such great opportunities, it's I think important to kind of think about both on one side what companies are thinking about on the other end of the world that are coming from smaller, less developed countries, but also as North American companies here and even South American companies that are looking to expand the value and also the revenue that they're making. And so today I'd like to discuss, some of the milestones that I feel many of the companies is important to think about before you start to do your international expansion. And it's very important that when you're doing international expansion, that you remain flexible in your approach. You have to be very dedicated in what you're looking to do. So you have to be dedicated to the international aspect of expanding your business, but you do have to remain flexible in order to be able to get it done. And so we'll start with a quote from a very prestigious business professor who said, in terms of Darwin's theory of evolution, that it's not the most intellectual of the species that survives, It's not the strongest that survives, but it's the species that survives is the one that is able to best adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself. And I think that is just as true in the survival of the species as it is in actually expanding your business internationally. So with that, we'll go into the next slide. So international expansion. Why would anybody want to expand internationally? So that's something that we're seriously going to consider before we actually get into the milestones. So the first half of the presentation here is giving you the reason why. Why would you actually even consider going into a completely different market, sometimes in a hostile environment to gain further global market share. And then we'll finish the conversation with the milestones that I believe are extremely important to hit in your home country before you start looking at doing any sort of international work. So this is an interesting graph that I found. It's from hbr.org. And so it says, it covers the 7 characteristics of firms that are either very successful when expanding internationally, or the ones that are actually, losing in those international markets. And as you can see here, the first thing is magnitude. So you see 90% goes to magnitude, which is align the scale and scope of overseas opportunity with its goals and capabilities. And I think that's extremely important to think about for companies that are looking to expand internationally, because many times it's very enticing to see a new market, international, and say, wow, that's a big opportunity. But if it doesn't match the actual scope of what you're doing, and it doesn't match your capabilities, then that's going to be a very difficult endeavor to take on. So you're going to have to learn a new market, and you're going to have to acquire the new capabilities to compete in that market. And so the success rate on something like that is minuscule, as you can probably figure out. Now, the next 4 attributes I think are about in the same range as far as importance. So you see on the left here is attitude, there's latitude, there's exactitude, and fortitude. And so taking them one by one, we see that attitude is extremely important, and you have to prioritize. If you're going to go international, you have to just be very dedicated to making that move. And it's going to be difficult. There's going to be challenges, but you need to really ramp up your organization, and everybody within that organization really needs to start thinking globally versus a local company. So it's very much about the attitude of both leadership, but then also the people that are working within that company. Latitude adapts its marketing policies and practices to the opportunity. Again, once you decide to go global, you have to really understand that the marketing in a local market is going to be much different than trying to figure out what a global campaign would look like for the same type of service or product. Exactitude is the corporate culture tolerates some ambiguity in market uncertainty. So I believe it was Aristotle Onassis that I'm loosely paraphrasing here, that said that we need to stop looking for calm seas to sail, and we need to really start understanding how to navigate the sea for what it is, whether that is calm or very volatile. And in international expansions, I think that's certainly true, because you're never going to find a time where it's just perfect, where everything is calm, everything is working. The world is constantly in a flux of change, and so you need to really just figure out how to deal with that volatility to be able to act quickly as a business. And nowadays, speed is much more important than probably many of the other attributes that traditional businesses used to think of. And of course, fortitude. You really need to have the strength of mind and to really be able to deal with the global changes and the setbacks and not really have it affect you that much. So we'll get right into it then. So why expand internationally? And there's several main reasons that I have found over the years that with working with technology companies that it's been very important as far as driving their international expansion. So I work with a lot of data companies that obviously talent is a huge issue. There's such a big shortage at the moment for technical talent. Enhanced revenue. Again, if you're going to be going overseas and you're going to be taking the risk and dealing with the challenges, you want to make sure that it's really worth it. So the enhanced revenue is obviously the second biggest driving force, if not the first many times. Thirdly is economies of scale, right? Because if you're really focused on doing what you do best, being able to do that on a global scale is going to create some very unique efficiencies and cost advantages that's going to give you a very different competitive advantage than just focusing your business locally. Hedge against local recessions. So obviously, we're living in a global marketplace and a global economy, but not all economies act exactly the same way at exactly the same time. So when you're dealing with international expansions, one of the benefits is that you're able to hedge these changes and fluctuations in economic output. So, having a market in Asia, but also having a market in North America really kind of hedges you against the risk of the downturns. Raise international capital. So liquidity is king. So being able to take advantage of opportunities in your industry really depends on your ability to act quickly. And your ability to act quickly also depends on access to capital. So if you can't access the capital to actually get your next project going, it doesn't matter how much of a great idea you might have, it's just going to die on the vine. Knowledge transfer. So, obviously we don't all have the same unique talents equally. And there'll be some areas of the world that develop certain abilities and skills much better, quicker, faster than other parts of the world. One example is the manufacturing strength of China. So, it's hard to match their manufacturing strength, and that's because they've really developed it, and because of the position they were in economically, globally, this was something that was a strength to them, and that's what they focused on. Whereas many of the Western economies probably focused more on the service side, and so they became extremely well adept at providing that service. And then, of course, it's diversification. So diversification is, I can't stress how important it is, because you never know what's coming around the corner. And being able to have a diversified both operations, diversified market, diversified supply chain, as we've seen now with COVID, is extremely important in the survival and being able to really succeed on a global scale. So the first thing that I'll start with is the international talent. So international talent, as we can see, is skills, knowledge, experience, local knowledge, top global universities, access to inexpensive labor. So being able to tap into resources of new markets is extremely helpful. Not every country has, top 100 global universities like London, Hong Kong, New York, right? So if you're coming from a different part of the world, you're really able to tap into these type of resources. Even if you're coming from New York and you're going to Hong Kong, you're really tapping into the university base that exists there and its ability to really produce top talent on a global scale. Of course, if you're going into less developed economies or third world economies where labor is less expensive, you can obviously gain, from that difference in the actual price of making goods or services. But I think for the most part, it's very much the skills, the knowledge, and the experience, because the experience that a business executive might have here in New York, who's only worked in New York, is going to be much different than an executive from Tokyo, Japan. And they're going to have a much different global outlook on how business should be done. And so being able to tap into those resources when you're going internationally is a huge reason why you should actually do it, if you can afford it. Enhanced revenue. So enhanced revenue, obviously everybody wants to make more money. And how do you make more money? So you can either compete on a much better level in your local market, or you can look into new markets, right? And so if you are a company based in Boston, then perhaps Hong Kong might be an interesting market for you to compete in as well. New customers and also larger markets and bigger demands. So before going into a new market, you really have to understand whether the demand is there, because they might have a huge population. So China might have a huge population, but if the product that you're making is not it's not demanded in that market, it doesn't matter how many people there are. You really need to make sure that it's a fit for the actual country that you're going into. And then, of course, it's the extended product cycle. So, with both goods and services, as time goes by, new competitors come into the market, new innovations are being developed, and, the product cycle at some point comes to a conclusion. Now, if you're working in a developed economy, such as the US, you can really leverage that extended product cycle if you're going into a less developed economy, which maybe doesn't quite have the service or the good that you're providing in your local saturated market. So again, being able to think about this on an international level and being able to understand, the continuity of your product cycle on a global scale, you'll be able to get more out of it and therefore retrieve the research and development that you've put into that type of either service or good. So extended product life cycle, I think, is a huge benefit when it comes to expanding internationally. Economies of scale. This has been something that has been a bit controversial, I think, in the last 5 to 6 years, with growing protectionism, growing nationalism within many of the countries and hemispheres of the world. Economies of scale have come under some scrutiny and some question. And I'm not here to be political in any way, and so I just want to acknowledge that given the pandemic, given what we have experienced in the last year, I think we have kind of come out of it with a certain understanding that it can't just be all about free market capitalism, although I am a free market capitalist. But you see China, which is also incorporating aspects of capitalism, but they're doing it within a state-run organization. So some people call it state-sponsored capitalism. Either way, there's some growing intervention within government to make sure that there's not shortages under certain extreme circumstances. Like we saw under COVID, we understood that we needed masks, we needed vaccines, we needed disinfectants. And if all these were made overseas and those countries also needed them just as much as we needed them, then there were shortages. So I think as we continue to function in a global economy, I think there's going to be a little bit of a need for government, especially on the Western side, to step in a little bit and make sure that the security aspect of globalization and free market capitalism is also well thought of and will not lend to any sort of shortages. So that being said, economies of scale provide some extremely beneficial aspects to any growing business that wants to do something globally. So first of all, it's the savings and costs. So savings and costs. So if you're making a specific good here in the U.S. And you've really focused in on making a certain widget, and you know you become very efficient, you become very good at it, but now you start selling it internationally. Well, that's going to increase your level of production, and by the same token, it's going to force you to really look at your efficiency, right? So because you're looking at growing the amount of product that you're getting out there, now it really makes sense to really buy in bulk. And that buying in bulk, especially if you're in a business that has high fixed costs. So, you know, if it's a capital intensive manufacturing type of business and you were only selling locally, but now all of a sudden you have the ability to sell internationally. Maybe you're doing both the US, Canada, and China. Well, you're going to be benefiting from the volume of raw material that you're buying, but then you're also going to be benefiting from the higher efficiency because you've already spent that money on the capital goods, and so now you're really going to be able to take advantage of that initial cost. So there's a decreased cost per unit associated with economies of scale and selling internationally. And then there's also the spread over more units of production. So it becomes cheaper. And as it becomes cheaper, then you gain more buyers. And as you gain more buyers, then you have to, again, you create more, you're obviously making more money, but you're also having to increase the efficiency. So it's a positive chain reaction that you have with these economies of scale. Hedge against local recessions. So, you know, as I mentioned before, the world is constantly in flux and changing, and some economies are doing well, others are feeling, you know, certain negative reactions to whatever it might be, whether it's local government actions or coming from the outside. But your local markets, they carry a lot of risk. And so in order to hedge against those risks, you want to make sure that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. And so growth is not uniform or universal. Therefore, if you're in a market that is shrinking, being able to, or if you've already made your international expansions before that market starts to shrink, then you have something to fall back on. And so you're very much in a position, in a much better position than maybe your competitors in that local market that haven't done any sort of international expansion. So at some point it becomes, you know, a competitive need to have, you know, multiple markets to be able to sell into. And then of course you want to hedge against unforeseen bubbles. And bubbles are, you know, it's hard to predict where a bubble is and if it exists. And the only way to know is when they actually burst. And so these bubbles, they although it's a global economy and they have ripple effects, if you have an international presence for your goods and services, it's easier to see those bubbles coming. So in 2008, when the bubble burst, it burst here in the US and then had a delayed effect of probably 1 to 2 years that it went into the European Union. And then from there, it kind of affected the entire global economy. Now, local companies here in the US got hit extremely hard. But on the more international scale, you know, these companies had a 2-year leeway to kind of make decisions that would allow them to better survive, you know, what we call the Great Recession of our time. So that's also one of the benefits for international expansions. Raise international capital. Now, if you're going to raise international capital, you're doing it for several reasons, right? So you're doing it because you want to increase your brand awareness and you want to increase your credibility in a foreign market. Why are you doing that? Obviously, you want the brand awareness because that's going to create additional revenue, more customers. And then you also want the credibility in that foreign market, so you can gain better advantage and negotiate on a much stronger level with your suppliers, your distributors, your retailers, whatever it might be. But being able to raise money in foreign currency is also a huge benefit when trying to compete in your local market. So some of the examples of raising international capital include doing an initial public offering in a foreign stock exchange. So this 2 years ago, I believe, we saw Anheuser-Busch, an American-German company that did a secondary listing on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, which was very successful. And again, being able to raise that money increases their credibility, but also their brand awareness. And then on the technology companies that I mostly work with, venture capital is also an extremely important aspect of any sort of success within innovation and technology. So if you can't raise capital as a technology company, and I'm not saying this for all technology companies, obviously some technology companies are brilliant and they figure out how to make money even before their product hits the market, but those are far and few in between. So on the venture capital side, which also includes seed funding, being able to raise venture capital in a foreign market also exposes you to all the knowledge and experience of those investors within those markets as well. So if you're an INT company and you've raised your Series A or you've raised your Series B funds here in the US, and you've gained a few critical customers in Asia, and now you want to scale your business and go into China in a big way, raising venture capital in Hong Kong or China is going to be a huge advantage for you versus your local competition here in the U.S. market, because you're really gaining from that experience of those investors in that local market that you're trying to compete in, which again, increased revenue is still going to make you a much better company in your local market as well. And then, of course, there's incentives by governments. So I've worked for several governments in the last 15 years, and the one thing that I have learned is that good economies and mega cities such as London, New York, Hong Kong, they compete for the best type of company. They compete because they want that cutting edge technology to come to their city. They want to be able to grow their R&D base because these are very high value jobs that when you create them have massive ripple effects throughout the local economy. So again, doing the international expansion really kind of taps into those incentives, government incentives, city incentives that are available for doing high value activity such as research and development. And then, of course, as you get more developed in a certain market, then you can also start tapping into more of the loans of the local financial sector as well. Sometimes you may enjoy better rates that are available internationally versus in your home market. But all these things, what you really find is that they increase liquidity. And liquidity in business is key because, like I said before, if you don't have the funds to act quickly on either changing market conditions or brilliant ideas that you feel you can innovate and really compete better in your market, then your idea is going to die on the vine. So international expansions do help in increasing that liquidity for the right type of companies. So the next one is knowledge transfer. So knowledge transfer, what does that mean? It means new skills. If you have new skills, because let's say I've given some examples here of what I'm seeing currently within technology, AI, robotics, automation, methods of operating that are unique to certain parts of the world. If you're able to go into those parts of the world, let's say China is a very AI focused type of technology country at the moment. So by doing business there, you're also benefiting from what they're experiencing as far as bringing new innovation to their economies. So this allows you to better train your employees, and it really allows you the ability to use information in a much more effective way to gain competitive advantage. So the knowledge transfer, I can't stress enough how important it is for international expansions. And now we'll go into the gist of the conversation, which is milestones to hit before expanding internationally. And so I've listed a few of them that I've seen over the years that I feel really kind of make the difference, whether a company is actually ready to expand internationally or they're kind of premature and will probably hit some major obstacles in these new markets. And so the first one is, do you have the know-how? Extremely important. If you don't know how to do it, it's going to be extremely hard. Do you have the money? Again, if you don't have access to capital to make your moves, it's going to be a very difficult ride for you. Do you have customers? Many companies overlook this. They feel like they can set up somewhere first and then they'll find their customers. But the reality is that most of the successful companies, they actually have a key client or a key customer that kind of brings them into a new market. Due diligence. You have to really do the research. You have to spend the time understanding your market before you decide to go into that market, because there's so many ways that you can go wrong. And even with all your due diligence, it's still going to be a challenge. And of course, do you have a plan? If you don't have a plan and you're not executing on something that you've already decided makes sense, and you're just kind of going on whims, it's going to be a difficult ride for you as well. So looking into those a little bit further in a little bit more depth, do you have the know-how? So have you done business internationally before? So that's extremely important. If you're already doing some international work, then it makes sense to build on that success. If you're not doing it, you really kind of have to figure out your marketing strategy to kind of start attracting some of those customers, because those customers will give you feedback on how to make your product even more attainable within those markets. And do you have experience with that part of the world? So doing business in the US versus doing business in Africa, that's going to be a huge cultural difference, both in business, but in also the day-to-day lives of people. And so based on that, you have to understand both the regulation and how the government works in these new environments that you're looking to do business in. I think the Chinese have done a great job of understanding this, and Chinese businessmen have been given lots of credit for being able to do business in extremely aggressive and challenging environments, which is probably why China has kind of grown globally, because they've really kind of had to think about how to get into these challenging markets and still make money. Barriers to entry. So, we've spoken about a few of them, whether it's government, regulation, the culture, but you really have to understand competition and customers are at the key of any international expansion. If you don't understand the competition and you don't understand how willing they are to fight for their piece of that local market, you might not necessarily have a plan in place to deal with that. And of course, the customers. You have to understand your customers because you might gain a few customers, but if you're doing things that are putting them off culturally, then at some point you're not going to succeed. And you're spending all this money on marketing infrastructure to be part of a new economy in international setting, and not taking those things into consideration, it's really going to have a long-term detrimental effect on your business. So do you have the money? I think that is one of the key things that we have to keep coming back to, because again, I work with a lot of technology companies. Sometimes they're struggling to raise money in their local market. And from my experiences, if you can't raise money in your local market, especially in a market like the US, Canada, or any of the Commonwealth countries, or in Europe, or Western Europe mostly, then it's going to be even tougher in any new sort of international environment, because you don't understand the culture. You're spending money to pursue this type of raising in funds. So you're better off just really kind of, you know, putting your nose to the grind and really trying to figure out how to actually raise those funds here in the US. Now, if you're coming from less developed countries or smaller economies, then I could see how coming to the US, coming to the Canadian market, the UK, Hong Kong, China, you know, then it makes sense, because obviously it might be more readily available. You might enjoy a bigger success, even though you have to deal with the cultural barriers as well. Seed funding, venture capital, I think I've discussed this. You know, you really need to be able to raise funds in your home country before trying to go into a different country. And that's because of credibility. So, you know, for most investors, if they're looking at a company and it's in a different country, they're going to want to see how well they're doing in that local market, because that is an actual scorecard of how they might do in a new market, even if it's a much more lucrative market. Not always, depending on where you're coming from, but in many cases, that's the way it is. And are you revenue positive? So are you able to actually turn over a certain amount of money each month? You know, I think that's important for anybody that's looking to raise more investments. Are you profitable, right? So, you know, in the consumer goods section, I think that's, you know, something that you have to strive for. On the technology side, that's not always a deal breaker. So many technology companies don't ever turn a profit, and at some point get sold out, or they do an IPO, and that's how people get paid out. But by the same token, you know, if you're a restaurant or, you know, some consumer good, household item, then of course you're going to have to figure out whether it's profitable if you're going to raise money. And then you really need to know, do you have the resources? So if you're not raising money, but you want to go into a new market, you really need to know what the burn rate is going to be, what the monthly burn rate of your company is going to be, because it's not going to be easy in the beginning. You're obviously going to have resources to compete with the local companies that are already established. And so you're going to really need to figure out, do you have the resources to really go the distance? And so you don't want to compete for 6 months, realize you ran out of money, now you have to come back. And you have to realize how aggressive the market that you're going into, as far as on the competition side, is going to be. How hard are they going to fight for their market share in their local market? So the next thing is, do you have the customers? So, you know, it's interesting that there's companies that may be very successful in their home country selling B2G. So they're selling into their government, and that is really their main source of income. And then for expanding, let's say, you know, a Eastern European company decides to come to the US, that might change. So your actual customer, the actual phenotype of the customer might change. Instead of B2B, instead of B2G, it might become B2B, or even straight to the consumer. So that's something that you really need to hone in on before you actually make your initial move, to make sure that your customer will have the same attributes, because it's quite different selling to a government than to a company. But by the same token, in a smaller economy, selling to the government might be almost the same as selling to a large US corporation. Next is, are you doing any current business in that part of the world? So again, I can't stress how important experience is. So if you don't have the experience in that part of the world, and you don't know what to expect, and you expect the same treatment that you have in your local market, whether that's, you know, good, bad, very competitive, not very competitive, then you're going to have a hard time, because you're not going to understand the moves that your competition is making in these new international markets. So that's something that you're really going to have to really research and understand both on the competitive side and on the customer side. And how are you serving your current customers, right? So how do you serve them? Do you find that you're using a distributor? Do you find that you're going directly to them? Is it a retailer? How are you getting your product or service to that customer? And how might that change if you're going into a new market now? Because that's something that you'll need to figure out how to deal with. And are these retailers or logistics companies or distributors in the new market, are they going to have the same type of business culture that you have experience in, or is it going to be completely different? You have to decide how many new customers you will need when you're going into a new market, because you might have one or two customers, but before you actually make that next investment in a manufacturing or sourcing or sales and service office, you're going to have to really understand what is it going to take to sustain that operation overseas. And not only because you're not there just to sustain yourself, but you're also there to make money. So you're really going to have a specific target and goal in mind of how many customers it's going to take to actually give you the results that you want to make it profitable to go overseas. The sophistication of the customer. So, it's much different going from New York into Morocco versus going from, Hong Kong, maybe into China, because from Hong Kong to China, you're still dealing with a very sophisticated customer on the mainland at this point, right? And so you're really going to have to figure out how are you going to be able to compete in such an environment where there is a mature market. So for that, you're going to have to really figure out the demographics and the psychographics of your customer. So, are they women, men? What age are they? What income group? But the psychographics is something that is a little bit more qualitative, and that's really going to take some insight from local researchers, and also, or hiring the right type of person to really understand what does your customer value, what is important to them. In order to occupy a space in their mind as a brand, you're really going to have to find out what is important to them. And so that takes a lot of cultural awareness when you're going into new markets. So focus groups, you might need to do a few to really be able to understand what those local markets will entail. And then again, it's the experience. So hiring people from your competitors to really kind of give you that insight on what this type of market will be like and what is important to your customer. Finally, the other part is, have you done your due diligence? And this, again, I hate to keep going back to the competitors, but you really need to understand your market, and you need to understand the business culture. And then finally, you have to figure out, are you competitively priced, right? Because you might be able to be competitively priced in a mature market, but then if you're going into a less developed country, well, how will you actually be able to compete on a higher price? And it doesn't mean that you can't. It just means that you might have to segment your customer base a little bit different, and go after maybe a higher income, smaller segment of that population. Is the market demand big enough to sustain expansion? So I think that is a huge error that many companies that I've seen have done in international expansion. There might be some demand, but then they don't realize that the demand is not big enough to make a difference to them when expanding internationally. And so on the more macro scale, you want to really understand the geopolitical risk, especially the last 4 to 5 years have been quite volatile. So you really want to make sure that you understand the country that you're coming from and the country that you're going into, and what that relationship is like on a diplomatic and political level. And then you also want to figure out the economic risk. And so, it really depends on how that city, that government runs their country. And so, if there's a lot of booms and busts, you're going to have to adjust for that, and you're going to have to prepare for something like that. It doesn't mean that it's still not a good choice to do business in that market, but you just have to have that understanding that it's a much more volatile market than the one that you're coming from. And of course, the cultural risk. So there's many times that companies have tried their best to take this cultural nuances of an operation and bring it to a new country. And I don't want to name any names, but some of them are big conglomerates that really research the market, and they try to localize their offering and find out that actually the customer is not really interested in a localized version of their product or service. They're much more interested in the actual authenticity that they are known for in their local market. So these type of small decisions can really cost you the game, the entire game in that international market in the long run. So finally, I'd like to end here with a plan. So you need to have a plan. And so in order to have a plan, you also need to have a timeline. So if you're going to do something, you need to give yourself certain deadlines and figure out, how long will it take you to accomplish each milestone. So for international companies, obviously you're going to have to do your market research. You're going to have to produce your assets, whether they're marketing assets or consumer good assets, to be able to get them into the new market. Site location, which is something that I am involved in to some extent as well. Site location includes a lot of things. It includes, understanding what the government incentives are within the cities that you're looking to set up. And again, some of it may be access to real estate, access to manufacturing, access to tax incentives or local research and development grants for doing certain types of activity. So you're going to have to really figure out, what are you doing in this new market? Are you going in there because you want to sell more? Are you going in there because you want to do R&D and you can see that there's talent at a much more affordable price that'll make you more competitive in your local market? Is it because of the site's ability to resource materials? So obviously Hong Kong is an excellent place for resourcing type of offices, and many of the major conglomerates use it for that type of work. So, but that being said, you want to really kind of scope out the market and make sure that you're looking at the entirety of the offering. And then finally, you're also going to want to look at the company structure. So what kind of structure should you have as a company? Are you going to go in and be a subsidiary? Maybe a joint venture might be more appropriate in certain countries that is difficult to do business in, and have a little bit more of a protectionist view of foreign companies coming in. Other times it might be partnerships, and sometimes, and I've seen this a lot more lately, is mergers and acquisitions. So being able to acquire a local company that is already well known in the industry, respected, and then being seen as one of the local players is actually can be a very decisive advantage when you're trying to compete in new markets. And so with that, I will conclude my presentation. And I wanted to thank everybody that has taken the time to hear what I had to say. I hope some of it was useful, and whatever you're looking to do next, my contact details are here, so feel free to reach out if you're going into the Asian hemisphere of business. Happy to discuss. I work for Invest Hong Kong, which is a government investment promotion agency. All our services are free and confidential because we're fully sponsored by Hong Kong taxpayers, and our remit is basically just to help foreign companies successfully come into Hong Kong and then use Hong Kong as an actual base into the rest of Asia. And with that, I'll maybe hand it over back to Stelios.
Dimitris, extremely insightful presentation approaching the topic of international expansion from every possible angle. Very comprehensive. And you know what? It's an important topic and needs to be approached carefully. The world is big and interconnected, especially when it comes to business, and everyone is intertwined. Global business impacts every organization, and today it's much easier than ever before for a business to reach out to global audiences and to expand internationally. So, as you said, one should carefully consider the steps, the milestones to hit prior to proceeding with an international expansion, and one should be also able to adapt and adjust to survive. So making sure that entrepreneurs, business leaders understand the milestones is of vital importance. Dimitri, on that note, and for high growth organizations that are very, very much intrigued by global expansion and can't wait to expand into new geographic territories, could you please share a few final thoughts and words of caution so that they proceed with the process carefully, but also of inspiration so that they will not be afraid to do that based on their strategic growth plans? So like in a sense, what would be your thoughts?
Sure. I would say in one sentence, make sure that you tap into the resources that are out there that are free. So work with your local governments, work with your state governments, work with your country governments, because they also have an interest in your success. So if you're looking to export into a new market, work with your government because they are also looking to help increase exports. If you're looking to expand into a new market and put boots on the ground, again, work with the local governments in that new market. And don't be afraid. It's at the end of the day, the world has become a global village. It's a lot smaller today than it ever was before because of technology, and it's only getting smaller. And COVID has showed us that we can do business now almost anywhere, just like we're doing here, virtually without any hiccups. And so it's something that is going to continue to grow and continue to be an opportunity. So you really have to get into that mentality and get very excited about the possibilities for your company.
Absolutely. And Dimitris, thank you very much once again for your time, your presentation as part of the Leading Entrepreneurs of the World series. Congratulations on all of your important work, advising and supporting entrepreneurs and business leaders and companies from all around the world with the very important process of preparing for and proceeding with an international expansion. Thank you, and talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Stelios. Bye-bye.